Well, hello there. Welcome to this video. This is going to be on addendum number 2 in the book How and Why Homeschool Math Can Be Vastly Superior to Public School Math. I'm Craig Hain, the author of the book, the CEO of Triad Math Inc., and this is addendum 2. Now, for some of you, this might be the most important part of the entire book because of what you're going to learn, things that are revolutionarily new. Basically, I'm going to talk about 21st century communications as they've now existed from 1950 coming forward to today. And I'm going to talk about what I'll call modern languages. Now, I use the word sapien, and that stands for Homo sapien, or human being. I'm a sapien, you're a sapien. Anyone watching this video or listening to this message is a sapien. On Addendum 1, we talked about human languages, natural languages, and mathematics and that sort of thing. But then in 1950, along came computer languages. Now, computers, you know what they are. Obviously, you have one. You're using one now as you watch this. But computers have their own unique languages. And it's not like any sapient natural language. Essentially, computers communicate with very simple binary language, zeros and ones, in its most primitive form. And we call these computer languages. Now, sapiens, you and me, we communicate with computers via these computer languages. And the way we do that, we write what are called programs. A program is simply a sequence of computer language commands or words. Now, first came very simple binary number words. The very early computers, you just programmed them with zeros and ones. Then you started using what are called hexadecimal numbers, and then later 8-bit bytes. And if you don't know what this means, don't worry about it. This was what computer programmers had to deal with. When I wrote my first computer program for the Intel 4040 microprocessor, I had to use hexadecimal numbers and bytes as my commands. Then came assembly language, and this was a more sophisticated computer language, and it was easier to write programs, much more efficient than using the hexadecimal numbers. Then came higher language programs. Now, the first two original ones were called Fortran and COBOL. Fortran stood for Formula Translator. COBOL stood for Common Oriented Business Language. Now, those were for mainframe computers, basically. And for personal computers then, as they came along, you got programs called BASIC and Pascal. And these are what are called higher level computer languages, and they're easier to use, much easier to write programs in BASIC and Pascal than with assembly language. And then later came things like Python and Java and JavaScript. And so there have been a lot of computer languages over the years that have been developed, higher level languages. And the higher and higher level languages became easier and easier to use to write programs. Now, this went on for several decades. And then in 1988, a completely new, much higher level language was created by a brilliant young theoretical physicist. His name was Stephen Wolfram. He got his PhD from Caltech in theoretical physics at age 20 in 1978. And he wrote this new high-level language then, which he introduced to the world in 1988, and it's called Mathematica. Now, Wolfram himself has said that Steve Jobs, who was a good friend of his, suggested this name. Jobs went ahead and bundled Mathematica with his new next computer. This is about 1988 or 89. And Steve Jobs' next computer and Mathematica were used to create the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee. I don't think that it would have been possible, or certainly not very easy, to create it with some of the earlier languages. Mathematica was a revolutionary new language. Well, Mathematica then, of course, as you can imagine, became a very widely used programming language by scientists worldwide. Wolfram Research has sold many copies of it, thousands no doubt, and it became widely used. In fact, there's a lot of science today, a lot of technology could not have been developed without Mathematica. But still, the Mathematica program was not useful communicating with other sapiens, only with a computer. Generally speaking, a computer program is not a practical way for two sapiens to communicate with each other. No computer at this point in time could understand any natural language message, and no human could understand a computer language message, i.e. a program. So they were two different languages. There's the natural language that humans use, sapiens used, and then there's the computer languages that we use to communicate with computers. Now, in 2009, this has all changed. Our species, sapiens, has once again entered a new level of civilization. What caused it? Wolfram Alpha. Now, this is a natural language to a computer, and much more as you're going to learn. Wolfram Alpha not only allows you to communicate with a computer with a natural language, it revolutionizes STEM math. Now, that's what I've talked about in this book earlier, so you know all about that. And then I'm going to tell you something. Don't give up on this addendum. The best is yet to come at the very end. As Mathematica grew more and more powerful, and it tapped into more and more databases, Stephen Wolfram wondered, would it be possible to create a Mathematica program that could recognize simple natural language commands and translate them into a Mathematica program that could then answer the questions or respond to the natural language command? He wondered if that could be done. He's actually somewhat dubious it could be done, but he went to work on it in the early 2000s, and it turns out it could be done. And in 2009, he released a large Mathematica program, 50 million lines, I'm told, and it was introduced to the world, and you could ask it a question or give it a command with a natural language, and it would respond. And this was what was called Wolfram Alpha. And you should go, if you've never done it, go to the website, wolframalpha.com, and just start playing with it. Just go there and start typing in questions or commands and watch what the answers are. And it's really, really, truly unbelievable what it does. So I believe that because of this, we're now entering a brave new world. When an ordinary person can give a command to a computer in a natural language, that means he's programming the computer. There's a genealogy person that's used Wolfram Alpha to do genealogy. It's just absolutely amazing. It's all sorts of things you could do with it. And remember this now, with Wolfram Alpha, all of the factual information in the world is at your fingertips. So when you write a program, it not only tells a computer what to do, the computer can go out and get lots and lots of information from all the databases in the world and do that. It's just absolutely amazing. I've already told you in this book, Wolfram Alpha revolutionizes STEM math. Wolfram Alpha will solve any math problem quickly and easily, and it'll often do it in ways that are not possible manually. As a matter of fact, if you're going to be a STEM professional today, you're going to have to master Wolfram Alpha or a tool like it. And Wolfram Alpha is the easiest, most available tool I know of. A STEM student today can master calculus and differential equations in a very small fraction of time using the old, obsolete manual methods. These old manual methods were difficult to learn and master and very limited in their capability. That's what the book was all about when you got to the chapter on STEM math. And I recall to you then, remember what the scientific calculator that was introduced in the early 70s, 1970, did for arithmetic operations, for arithmetic. It was revolutionary. When the HP 35 came out, all the manual techniques were obsolete. Slide rules were obsolete. Log and trig tables were obsolete. And doing math now for engineers became much, much easier. Well, Wolfram Alpha is much more revolutionary than that. Calculus and differential equations are no longer a great barrier to STEM students for STEM subjects. That used to be. Wolfram Alpha is like a huge tunnel through this great barrier, and it opens up the STEM fields to many, many more students. It's truly a new world. Now, that's what the book was all about earlier. So that's nothing you haven't learned already in the book. And as I told you, in our tiers 4, 5, and 6, we present all of the various STEM math subjects in a revolutionary new way. It's much easier to understand and much easier to use. It's vastly superior to the classical standard math curriculum. That's why we say homeschool math can be vastly superior. Until the public school programs catch up with it, you can be vastly superior. And I don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know. Now, if you don't want to go to Wolfram Alpha and type in questions, if you've got an iPhone, use Siri. Ask Siri a question, because guess what? Siri is based on Wolfram Alpha. Basically, you're using a version of Wolfram Alpha when you ask Siri a question. Now, we have modern AI techniques, artificial intelligence technologies have made it possible to understand natural language. When we spoke in natural language, and then it'll convert it into written. So you can actually communicate with tools like Siri just using verbal commands, as you know. But there's a problem with Wolfram Alpha. You can only ask it one question or pose one problem at a time. It'll answer it. That's wonderful. But what if you want to build on that and then follow that with a follow-up question? Well, that's not particularly easy to do. In other words, Wolfram Alpha is not a programming language. It's a tool to get questions answered. But you can't write a more complicated program with just Wolfram Alpha to do a more complicated activity. Well, now that has changed too. In 2016, a revolutionary new programming language was introduced to the world. It's called Wolfram language. Now that's 3 years ago. And this is going to truly revolutionize STEM, but it's going to go beyond that. It's going to revolutionize how sapiens deal with the world and each other. What if you could write a really sophisticated mathematical program but use natural language commands? And what if you could understand a mathematical program written in Wolfram language just by looking at it? Not even having a computer act, you could see what it was going to do. Well, this is the first time in human history that you can communicate with both computers and other sapiens with this new language. Now, this is hard to get your mind around. This is a new world. Stephen Wolfram has done a lot of videos on this, and you can go watch his YouTube videos. He talks about it. He combined the natural language of Wolfram Alpha, its ability, with the Mathematica programming language to create Wolfram language. They're combined. And now you can write a Wolfram language program that is quite complex and sophisticated, and the computer can execute it, but also another sapien can understand it just by looking at it. That's because it's written in a natural language. Now, Stephen Wolfram has made the statement that he believes that modern, properly educated sapiens will now have a new language to communicate with other sapiens that's vastly superior in some cases to natural language. And that's quite something. Communication is always a challenge. Now, I've studied Wolfram language myself briefly. I'm no expert on it, but based on what I've seen and what I've learned, I think he's right. I think a student today can learn Wolfram language much easier than any of the classical languages like Python or Java. But better yet, I think a sapien can look at a Wolfram language program that was written by some other sapien and understand it without executing it in a computer. So it's a double whammy. When you write a Wolfram language program, you're communicating both with a computer and another sapien. In fact, Stephen Wolfram, who is an expert, obviously, with Wolfram language, says that he is able to express things in Wolfram language that are very difficult or even impossible to express in any natural language. He discovered this when he was writing his book, Introduction to Wolfram Language. He said, I got to the point where I can have a Wolfram language command that I understood, and I couldn't express it with natural language. So that's the world we're coming to. Now, what about, where do you get Wolfram language? Well, you can go online to Wolfram Research and get it, but there's another way you can get it. All of the Wolfram tools that have been developed, Mathematica, Wolfram Alpha, and Wolfram language, are now available in one very small, portable, inexpensive computer. And this computer has many, many other advantages as well and features. It's called the supercomputer, and this came to the world in 2018. Now here's how it came about. Stephen Wolfram bundles all of the Wolfram tools that we just talked about with what's called the Raspberry Pi. You can go look it up. I just call it RPI here for shorthand. And this is a wonderful little single board computer that only costs $35 USA dollars. Comes out of the United Kingdom. And for whatever his motive, he bundled all of these Wolfram tools with it. He was asked once why he did it, and as I recall, he just said, well, because I wanted to. I think he believes that this is going to transform how the new generation deals with computers and each other. Now, the Raspberry Pi, this little $35 computer, very powerful, by the way, uses what's called the Linux operating system. Now, that, in a way, is the most sophisticated operating system in the world today, and it's very safe for a lot of reasons. But you've also got to hook this computer into a variety of peripheral components. You'll need to hook it through an HDMI cable to a monitor. You'll need a keyboard and a mouse, hooked through the USB ports and so on. And it communicates to the internet through Wi-Fi or Ethernet. Now, it's pretty difficult to use a Raspberry Pi for a non-technical person. I found it extremely difficult. So we had some engineers create the supercomputer, which is based on the Raspberry Pi and has all the other stuff included to make it easy to use. So the supercomputer, which is based on the Raspberry Pi, it comes with peripheral components you'll need and a lot of educational things you'll need. And it's very easy to use. That's the whole point of it. And it costs less than $200 today. Go to supercomputer.org and you'll learn all about it. It also comes, by the way, with lots of other things that are of great value to students of all ages. It has things on it for young children. It has all sorts of things on it that adults love to use that are not interested in math or anything. And they just find all sorts of things to use. It's an extremely useful thing. It's very secure and safe. And if you go, you'll study it at supercomputer.org. You'll learn all about it. It's very safe. It's very easy to transport, very secure. It's a wonderful way to surf the internet for technical reasons and so on. Along with the 6-tier program we've talked about in the book, the supercomputer revolutionizes modern math education. You don't need it until you get to tier 4. But once you get to tier 4, you want to use a supercomputer because you can store the Wolfram commands. You can just do all sorts of things with it you can't do with an ordinary computer. Well, the bottom line is then modern 21st century math education is vastly superior to the obsolete classical 20th century math education we call the standard math curriculum. I don't care if you deliver it on Chromebooks or whatever or online. It's just no good because it's obsolete. It's old, obsolete manual tools. You need to use the modern tools. Now, what's the future hold? Well, I think it's probably as difficult or more difficult today to foresee the next 50 years and what our future generation are going to live with as it was to see our future generation back in the 1950s. As you know, I'm 80 years old. I was born in 1938. So I lived through all of this. And I was born before the first computer, the ENIAC, was ever developed. I lived through it, and I can tell you, no one foresaw the future that we're living today in 2019. I mean, no one saw it coming. Just think of smartphones. They're unbelievable. And even as recently as 15 or 20 years ago, you couldn't imagine them. Blockchain technologies, you may not know what that is, but I will tell you, it's going to revolutionize the way we do contracts and all sorts of things in the future. The thing that you may have heard of that's based on blockchain is Bitcoin. But blockchain is a revolutionary technology. In fact, George Google wrote a book about it, Life After Google. It's all about blockchain. Something called convolution neural networks. This is what the modern AI is based on, artificial intelligence. AlphaGo is an example of an application which beats the Go. It's better. It can do things no human can do. 3D printing. My goodness, the future is going to be absolutely revolutionized when you can create all sorts of physical things using printing is a bad term. It's really additive. It's building things with an additive process, and you're going to build all sorts of things with it. And it's almost like what you saw in Star Trek. You'll go and say, "This is what I want," and it'll create it for you on the spot. In terms of internet communication, 5G is coming. We're on 4G today in this country, but 5G is coming. And that really is the internet of everything. Everything's going to be hooked to the internet. Autonomous vehicle, just look at what Tesla's doing. And now all the other companies are trying to follow along behind them. And they're way behind Tesla. Tesla's way out ahead of the others, and I don't know what's going to happen with it, but it's predicted that within a few years, humans won't be driving cars anymore. Human-driven cars will become as obsolete as horse and buggies, because autonomous vehicles are much safer than human-driven vehicles. Much safer. No comparison. Not to mention then the convenience of it. Uber will not have human drivers. It'll be autonomous, and this is going to revolutionize things in many ways. Space revolutions are happening as we speak. SpaceX, reusable rockets, and all that. What Jeff Bezos is doing with Blue Origins. In biology, CRISPR-Cas9. If you don't know about it, believe me, that's going to revolutionize. It is revolutionizing biology. The only solution, if you want to get rid of carbon dioxide or lower it down, is going to be nuclear reactors. Windmills and solar panels ain't going to do it. It's going to take nuclear reactors. And today they can make them safe, easy to, and they can burn the existing waste. It's just amazing. And it's on and on. These are all things that are happening today. This is what our children, this is the world they live in. A lot of the older people, we haven't adjusted to it yet. We don't understand it. For example, I talked in the last video about how verbal communication is so limited. Well, it was in the old days. But today, because of the internet and videos like this, verbal communication now is easier than written communication. You got a choice. You can read this addendum or you can listen to me talk about it. And a lot of people are going to prefer the audio way. So actually, written communications is becoming less and less important. I don't know what it's going to be like in the future. Certainly today, you don't need to teach your children to write cursive. That was obsoleted way back with typewriters. And then typewriters became obsolete with word processors. And on and on. And of course today, you can just talk, and we have technology that will convert it into text. Okay, is all this book and now this final addendum a sales message? Am I trying to sell you something? Absolutely yes. Of course we're trying to sell you. What am I trying to sell you? Well, first I'm trying to say you want to educate yourself. If you read this book and understand all of this book and these two addendums, you're going to be way ahead of most parents and most teachers. And then I want you to take that education you've learned, what you've learned about the thing, and give your children a wonderful future using the latest 21st century math education and technologies like Wolfram language and Wolfram Alpha. That's your responsibility. If you're a responsible parent or teacher, this is what you've got to do if you want your children to succeed. The children that are going to be taught these technologies are going to have tremendous lives. Now, you might, as always, say, well, how do I do that? Well, there's two choices available today. And there'll be many more choices coming. If you find a better choice, great. But you can start today. Go to homeschoolertoday.com and look at our math education there. We have a lot of free stuff, obviously, our free resources, but we also have a lot of products that you can buy that use the right content and spike pedagogy, and we tell you all about it there. Start using those products to educate your children with mathematics. But go beyond that. Once they get to a certain point, buy a supercomputer or a Raspberry Pi and start using the Wolfram tools and let your child start using Wolfram language. I believe that anybody today ought to start learning how to communicate with Wolfram language. Whether you want to write computer program. Most people don't care about Python and Java in writing the old-fashioned computer program. But Wolfram language is different. If you learn Wolfram language, you'll be able to go to a computer and write a natural language program that will create a wonderful thing. The world, believe me, is revolutionized today. And that's what this book's all about. And this addendum is sort of the culmination now of this book. Yes. Educate yourself first. Learn what you can be doing. Learn what the new technologies are. I hope this book has helped you understand that. And then go out and do the right thing. Get the right training for your child. Get the right education for them. And like I said, these are the two choices that are available that are already out there. If you find something better, wonderful. That's great. But you can start there. They're very, very inexpensive and risk-free, by the way. So you have nothing to risk. Okay, this is Craig Hain, Dr. Dell. I really enjoyed communicating with you on this entire book and this particular addendum. And I may very well see you in the future if you start using some of our tools to educate your children. Hope you're going to have a wonderful life. And more importantly, I hope your children are going to have a wonderful life. Dr. Dale. See you on another video.